Section 3, we will talk and discuss about the cleaning technique. So till this point in time, let's revise. We have discussed about what are the basics of data analytics. We have talked about what are the risks associated with data analytics. We have talked about what are the databases which we can be used for storing the variables. We have discussed about what are the variables. We have discussed about what are the categories of variables. We have talked about the continuous variable, we have talked about the discrete variable, we have talked about the classification of variables from the perspective of numeric, categorical, boolean, or number date. So we have discussed all these things, right? So the earlier sections which we have discussed were more pertaining to the data. And once the data is collected, how you classify those, in form of various variables and so on and so forth. Now the section 3 is all about cleaning of data. Once the data is basically collected, you need to clean the data, and you need to ensure that the data can be used by various algorithms for the next subsequent set of action. So let's move to the section 3.1, which is data scrubbing. So data scrubbing is again one of the technique which we will see in the next subsequent slide, how you can clean the data. So section 3.1.1 basically describes the various methods for data scrubbing, and obviously the goal of data scrubbing is to clean the data set so that it can be used by your data analytics projects. Right? So it's kind of prerequisite for using any data sets in preparation of your data analytics projects. So your data scrubbing is required to eliminate any kind of problems of missing values, or eliminate any kind of problems of duplicates or redundant variables, or any kind of errors which are encountered as a part of data collection process. So there are several data scrubbing techniques which can be applied during the data analytics process, and then all these data scrubbing methods, whether it's a variable selection, whether it's merging variables, whether it's one hot encoding, whether it's binning, we will talk and discuss about it in detail in the next subsequent slides. So, but then in a nutshell, these are the various ways, ways by which we do the data cleanup, and data scrubbing is the terminology which we use for doing the data cleanup. And there can be a question which can be asked in exam about the data scrubbing and what are the different data scrubbing methods. I have seen the question being asked pertaining to the binning technique. What is binning technique? What is one hot encoding technique? What is the merging variable? What is the variable selection? So these can be the potential questions which can be asked in exam. So this slide itself is an important slide. It can basically have at least 3 to 4 questions asked in exam. Now let's look ahead specifically about the various types of techniques which are used or outlined for data scrubbing as we see this across. So let's look and discuss about each of these techniques in a detail, right? So your data scrubbing, as we say, is a major effort in data analytics projects. We definitely need to ensure that the data which is being analyzed has to be in a clean and reliable format. Otherwise, we cannot, we cannot do any kind of reliable work on that, right? Or we might end up getting a misleading insights due to the issues which are pertaining to the data collection. So these can be issues pertaining, the issues can be likes of missing values, the likes of duplicates, the likes of data entry errors. Those issues needs to be resolved as a part of data scrubbing techniques, right? So there are 4 primary methods for data scrubbing which are described in detail in this section. The first one being the variable selection. So as part of variable selection data scrubbing technique, the selection of a right variable in the data set definitely plays a crucial role in your data analytics project. So we have to, we have to collect, and we need to ensure that we are collecting only the right data specifically which is required for the project or program, right? So we usually may tend to collect more information or more data, but that might not be necessarily the best option, right? So we need to choose, and we need to select the variables which are collected, right? So choosing too many variables may basically demand an extensive computing power, right? So as a part of data collection, you can think of collecting the data by getting it, and talking to all people. But then when you try to analyze the data, you need to be very selective in choosing those variables, right? So you need to have the right set of variables which has to be chosen so that you can analyze those data in a right format, right? So at max, you should choose, or you should have data set within which are having variables in the range of 2 to 4. So if there are variables which are more than 4, then it becomes relatively a tough choice to analyze those data, right? The choice of variable, as we say, basically depends upon the goal of analysis as well, right? So the number of variables, as we say, can also be adjusted until a meaningful pattern emerges from the analytics work, right? So at the end of the day, it is wiser to start with a small set of variables and check the kind of accuracy of data analytics outcome. And if the results which we are getting are they satisfactory in our nature, then we can definitely continue with the variable selections which we have done. And if we further need to revise and revisit the data variables choices, then we can definitely modify and increase and add more variables. So variable selection is again one of the critical path, and it's one of the critical ways by which you try to limit your number of variables based on the overall goal of data analytic projects. So we have to be very prudent in selecting the variables when we are carrying out the data analytic project. The next data scrubbing technique, as we call, is called merging variables. So in this method, we merge two or more variables into one meaningful variable, right? So rather than excluding the variables completely, we can definitely merge some of those variables together, with similar variables to basically preserve the maximum information. So if you try to do a variable selection, you might miss out on some of the critical values, right? So the best technique in that case can be merging the like-minded or like-sided variables, right? So we can think of merging them together with the other similar variables so that we can preserve maximum related information pertaining to that variable. So the advantage of this method is it is easier to visualize the relationship with a smaller number of variables, and we can still retain the overall data information, right? So the overall intention is we should have a minimum number of variables, and how we can attain the minimum number of variables, that can be either through the variable selection, but then when you do a variable selection, you basically discard some of those variables. But then when you do a merging of variables, uh, you try to basically segregate and merge some of the similar variables without losing the crucial information about the data variable. So that's again one of the data scrubbing technique or methodology which is discussed. The next one is one-hot encoding. So there can be a question on the one-hot encoding. I've seen, at least in the exam, there can be a question on the variable selection, on merging variables, and one-hot encoding and winning technique as well. So one-hot encoding can often be can be used to reformat any kind of existing variables into other type of variables which can be used by the algorithm. So let's take an example, right? So if there is a categorical variable which have two values such as good or bad, we cannot use these good or bad to be taken ahead in any kind of mathematical processing, right? So if we have to process good or bad, as two categories, we need to convert these good or bad into the numeric format, right? So either we can convert good into 0, or good into 1, or bad into 0. And when you categorize bad as 0 and good as 1, we can definitely do the mathematical operations based on these categories. So your one-hot encoding basically helps you to reformat your data into the required format. So it's reformatting your numeric or timesheet variable into the categorical variable format.